All right, Rabosai, good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's daf. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan. Jerry and Abby Applebaum for dedicating all the shurim in memory of Basya Bas Chaim and David ben Avram. Doctors Paul and Linda Weinberg for dedicating the shurim this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Mordechai Yoshua ben Peretz Moshe Balea Miriam. Paul and Kathy Pollack in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Dana Baker Matson. Stephen Terry Zinn with gratitude to Hashem for the birth of their grandson Bunim Tzvi Hirsch Zinn Naftali Tilson, with Akaras Atov to his chaver Benjamin Wallen, to the entire shir. Avram and Shandi Kelman in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Avram's mother, Sarah Braina Bas Yoshua Heschel. Our Daf Yomi sponsor today is Yehuda and Bracha Buchwalter in commemoration of the 77th anniversary of the liberation of Buchenwald by the U.S. Third Army, with incredible siyata d'shmaya. It's also important also for us to point out, today is Yom HaShoah, and it's an interesting thing that very often, so Yom HaShoah in many communities is not, especially in many from communities, is not fully observed, often because Tisha B'Av is used as a day in which we commemorate the 6 million. I know, like, for example, here in the shul, when we do kinnis on Tisha B'Av morning, we put a very heavy emphasis on focusing on the 6 million Kedoshim, on focusing on the Holocaust. But it's always important whenever the world, and especially here, in Eretz Yisrael, it's an important day, and in the world in general, it's a Holocaust commemoration day. Whenever the 6 million Kedoshim are being remembered, we have a moral obligation to remember them as well. Whether we see this as the primary Memorial Day or a secondary, no such thing as a secondary day. Let me say it differently. Whether we use the halachic day of Tisha B'Av as our day to really focus on the loss, and today is kind of something secondary within our consciousness, we still have an obligation to remember. And we still have an obligation to do something. If the world is remembering, if the world is mourning, then we have an obligation to do so as well. A churban that is less than a century old, a churban that from the Jewish perspective has effectively occurred less than a century for the Jew is like yesterday. We always have an obligation to carry this incredible churban with us. We always have an incredible obligation to carry this incredible carbon with us, the churban and the carbon. And we should hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas of the 6 million Kedoshim should have an aliyah. They should have a licht Gan Eden, and all of Klal Yisrael somehow, some way should experience a nechama. So with that, let us begin. So we are continuing. Today's daf is Nun Beis 52, and we are picking up on Nun Aleph Amud Beis 51b. We left off in the middle of a sugya, Rabbi Shimon. It was 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines up from the bottom. And the truth is, it was in the middle of a different topic. We had a statement by Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Gamliel, Beis Shammai, Rabbi Shimon, Ben Azai, Rabbi Nechemya, all of them hold that Ma'amar Kona Kinyan Gomer, that effectively Ma'amar goes ahead and affects marriage. Now again, that statement means different things to different people, but Lamaisa, all of these particular opinions are united in this approach that Halacha Lamaisa Ma'amar affects marriage. So we left off with Rabbi Shimon. I began this case yesterday. Rabbi Shimon, what does Rabbi Shimon say? Disanya, Amar Luhu Rabbi Shimon L'Chachamim. Rabbi Shimon said to the Chachamim, in Bias Rishon Bia, Bia Sheni Eina Bia, in Bias Rishon Eina Bia, Bia Sheni Nami Eina Bia. So you also remember again, what was the case here? Take a look at Rashi once more. Amalan Rabbi Shimon, Lekama Paraki Isha Rabba, we did this yesterday. Ben Teisha Shana B'Yom Echad, Haba Ayivim Torah. Remember again, we spoke about the interesting idea that Halacha L'Maisa, only an adult has the ability to go ahead and affect marriage. Yet, halacha l'maisa, the bia, of a boy after the age of 9 years old in one day is considered to be a halachically valid act of bia. So again, we illustrated that within a case of adultery. So in this case over here, Reuven dies, leaves behind one wife and two brothers, right? One wife, Rachel, one widow, Rachel, two brothers, Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi are twins. They're both 9 years old and 1 day. So what happens? Both of the brothers have bia with Rachel. So the shaila now is, what's the status? What's the status here? So Rabbi Shimon says, so look at Rashi. So what happened? So habayivimto v'chazru ba'echav ben teisha shana yom echad ala psula al yado. The bias ben teisha shana kima'amar shivu rabbanon v'havili ma'amar achar ma'amar umikudeshes af l'sheni upasta af ala rishon kirabbanon. So let's listen to this. We're going to see right now that in halacha, the bia of a boy of 9 years old in one day effectively is the same thing as mamar. It's an act of mamar. So listen to this. It says the Gemara. So Amalu Rabbi Shimon says the Chum like this. In bias rishon bia, bia sheni eni bia. So if the bia of the first brother is in fact a halachic bia, then the second bia is meaningless. In bias rishon ena bia, and if the bia of the first brother is not a bia, then what? Bias sheni nami ena bia. Then ultimately the bia of the second brother is also not a bia. We'll say, what's the point for us? Vaha bias bentesha de kimamar shavyo rabbanon. Ultimately, again, the bia of a 9-year-old boy, of 9-year-old and 1 day boy, is effectively the same thing as maimar. The Kam Rabbi Shimon ena bia, and Rabbi Shimon says the second one won't be a bia. What do you see from here? That Rabbi Shimon holds mamar kona. That's it. That again, essentially, so what he's saying is the first brother affected ma'amar with the Yevama through his bia, and therefore, if that's the case, the second bia is irrelevant. Ma'amar kona kinyan gomer. Beautiful. Ben Azai, what's Ben Azai's case? The Sanya Ben Azai Omer, yesh ma'amar achar ma'amar b'shnei yavmin v'yevama achos. So it's actually very interesting. Ben Azai holds like this. There is ma'amar achar ma'amar in a case of two brothers with one widow. The ein ma'amar achar ma'amar b'shtei yevamis v'yavam echad. But there is no ma'amar achar ma'amar with two widows and one brother. Why the distinction? Rabbi say, take a look at Rashi. This is actually quite interesting. Rashi says over here, yesh ma'amar achar ma'amar. Yesh ma'amar achar ma'amar b'shnei yavim v'yavama achos. The kol chad v'chad hakinu lei rabbanon ma'amar ba. So we'll say it's actually very interesting that ultimately, again, every brother has the right of ma'amar, right? Every brother. So therefore, again, interesting. Ben Azai says when there's two brothers and one widow, there is such a concept of ma'amar achar ma'amar. Again, I will say, remember, the net effect of doing ma'amar achar ma'amar is what? What do you have to do? Right? Get and chalitza. So when we say yesh ma'amar achar ma'amar, we don't actually mean that it works to affect any type of marital bond. What it just does is it works to the fact that you have to now unravel it, right? That you'd have to give a get and you'd have to do chalitza. But interestingly enough, the Halacha L'maaseh says when it's one yavam and two yevamos, then there's not ma'amar achar ma'amar, one man, two women, because ultimately, again, Rashi says over here, the chol koach shetiknu chacham b'ma'amar kana ma'amar rishon, because ultimately, again, every yavam, every brother only has one act of ma'amar to use, and therefore, again, you see from here that if he does ma'amar achar ma'amar, it doesn't work, which tells you once again that ma'amar is kona. Good. I will say, remember again, all we're going through is this entire list of people who hold ma'amar kona. That ma'amar ultimately affects it affects our relationship. That's what we're going to call it. Rabbi Nechemia, what does Rabbi Nechemia say? This time Rabbi Nechemia Omer, achas bi'ila va'achas chalitza, whether the yavam does bia or does chalitza, bein b'tchila, bein ba'emtza, bein ba'sov, ein achareha klum. Ultimately, I will say, remember again, so Rabbi Nechemia holds that halacha l'maisa, in all of these cases where, you have ma'amar achar ma'amar, get achar ma'amar, ma'amar achar bia, all these cases, Rabbi Nechemia holds that there are two things that are showstoppers, so to speak, right? Either bia or chalitza. If bia occurs, then what? That's yibum, we're done. If chalitza occurs, that's chalitza, and we're done. Anything after those processes is halachically non-binding, halachically irrelevant. So the Gemara says, "Vaha bia psula the kamamar shavi rabbanon v'katani enacharei klum." That I both say bia psula. Now remember, what's the definition of a bia psula? So like we saw in yesterday's daf, a bia psula is a bia that occurs after some other process. For example, first the yavam does ma'amar and then bia, or get and then bia. That's called the bia psula, a compromise. By the way, I want to thank everyone for the suggestions about the definitions yesterday, which are very, very helpful. Rabari, Paul Polik, we had compromised, we had flawed, right? So again, the idea over here is, so whatever lashon you'd like to use, right? So halacha l'maisa, a bia psula is essentially the equivalent of ma'amar. And yet halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Nechemia is saying, once you have a bia psula, ultimately, again, that brings this process to an end. And halacha l'maisa, it's kona. So again, I will say all of these opinions hold that ma'amar is kona, kinyan, gomer. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Keitzad asam ma'amar. So I will say, so remember again, the Mishnah then wanted to go ahead and illustrate the case of ma'amar achar ma'amar. There's only one problem. So the Gemara, top of Nun Beis, the Gemara says, so the Gemara wanted to illustrate the case of ma'amar achar ma'amar, and also get achar get. The problem is that halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah illustrated a case of get achar ma'amar, and not get achar get. To which the Gemara says, hi, get achar get who? You're not giving, the example in the Mishnah was not a case of get achar get. The case of the Mishnah was a case of get achar ma'amar. That was just the example the Gemara gave. Rav Yehuda, this is what it means to say, get achar get u'ma'amar achar ma'amar kida amron. The case of get achar get and the case of ma'amar achar ma'amar is, as we explained before, yavam echad v'yavama achos ketzad. What's the case ultimately again of one yavam and one yavama? So the Gemara says, ketzad hatarasan. Ultimately, again, how would you go ahead and unravel this relationship? So the Gemara says, asam ma'amar b'yavimto v'nasan laget tzricha heimena chalitza. So I will say, to which the Gemara essentially answers, the Mishnah doesn't really need to illustrate the cases in totality because the cases are kind of straightforward. What the Mishnah is actually trying to illustrate to us is, if you get yourself into one of these situations, halacha l'maisa, how do you unravel it? How do you unravel it? That's really the question we're dealing with. So in a case of one yavam and one yavama, ultimately, again, what happens? If there was ma'amar and then get, what's the halacha? Ultimately, again, there's still chalitza required. Incredible. So the Gemara says, before we go on, I will just mention to you, I did send out some copies of the Shulchan Aruch on this sugya. And also we printed out some copies that are here as well. I will say, I'll just mention that the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Ayin, because in this Evana Ezra Kuf Ayin, because how do we paskin in this situation of ma'amar achar ma'amar, get achar get, which really, the truth is, I will say, if you notice in this, what it really gets to is the fundamental question of what does ma'amar do? Right, I will say, remember again, we had Rashi, how did Rashi define what does ma'amar do? Right, ktsas. It does a little something, right? A little something, which is such a strange thing to say, because what does that mean, a little something, right? A little married, a little pregnant, like what's the pshat over here? So it's interesting. So the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Ayin says, I'm just going to read to you just a couple quick lines. So this is Kuf Ayin Sif Aleph. Shulchan Aruch says, Hayavama shenasan lag hayavam get krisus pasla. Upasal tzara sa'alav v'ashara achin midivreihem. So I will say, halacha l'maisa. Let's first of all establish number one. When a yavam gives a yavama a get, what does that do? Midaraisa, what does that do? Nothing. Midaraisa, when you give your yavama a get, it does nothing. The only thing midaraisa that works in the yibum scenario is chalitza. Yibum or chalitza. There are two options on the table. There's no get. Midrabanan, if you give the widow a get, now ultimately again she's puzzled to him, pasla upasal saraseh alav va'kol shara achim midivreihem. Once one of the brothers gives the widow a get, the yibum window is closed. No one is allowed to marry this woman, not the brother who gave the get, not the other brothers, and they are not permitted to do yibum with her. nor are they permitted to go ahead and do Yibum with any of the co-wives. So that's effectively what get does. It shuts down the process. The Shulchan Aruch then goes on and discusses what kind of get, which we're actually going to see in today's daf a little bit more, what type of get is able to do this. Good. Halacha Beis. V'china ma'amar. Listen to this. Perish. Yevamos niknis midaraisa. Remember again, what does ma'amar do midaraisa? What does ma'amar do midaraisa? Nothing. Because remember again, as the Ramah points out, Perish Yevamos niknis midaraisa bebia. Lo zulas. There's only one thing that affects Yibum, and that's Bia. The Chachamim tiknu shikad. So again, we'll get to this. Eino kone ba kinyan gamar. Shem balo tzia achar ma'amar. Tzricha get la ma'amar. V'chalitza lafkia hazeka. Listen to this. So both say, what does ma'amar do? What does ma'amar do? You know the only thing that ma'amar does, really what it does, is if you now decide you have a change of heart, you don't want to marry her, you need to get. You need to get. That's what ma'amar effectively does. That Allah Lamaisa, once you do ma'amar, you now need a get. But I will say, what else do you need in addition to the get? Chalitza. Why? What do you need chalitza for? The zika. Remember, this is very important. See, I both say, the fact that you need chalitza for the zika indicates to us that the ma'amar doesn't really do anything. The ma'amar is a rabbinic mechanism. Again, we're going to see, the whole ma'amar discussion is going to see, what you're wondering in your mind is what? Right? So why is there even a concept of ma'amar? Oh, so that we're going to answer today. We're going to see the role of ma'amar today. So we're working a little bit backwards. So get, I understand, what get kind of does is, get closes the Yibum window, midrabanan, and once you do that, there's no going back. Halacha l'maisa, ma'amar, it's not immediately clear why it's here or why it exists. The role will be clear, but again, what we do know is if you do ma'amar, all it does is affect some status that would require a get to undo it, but would still halacha l'maisa require a chalitza ultimately to take away the zika. Now again, therefore the Shulchan Aruch says, me'achar shein ma'amar kone kinyan gamer, v'lo get dochet dechia gamer, lefichach moil ha'maisa shenasa achar kach, hein get achar get, hein ma'amar achar ma'amar. So both say, now the Shulchan Aruch paskins, and with this we're going to go on, this is in Siv Gimel, so the Shulchan Aruch says, now that I know that ma'amar doesn't really affect any level of status, and ultimately again, get doesn't dissolve zika. Therefore, how do we paskin? Yesh get achar get, and yesh ma'amar achar ma'amar. And now both say it makes sense, because since again, get doesn't remove zika, therefore again, even though you gave a get to Rachel, you could still do something with Leah. If you give a get to Leah, that's meaningful as well. Now again, remember, the meaning of that is expressed how? In a prohibition to marry Leah and her relatives. But Lamaisa, because Ma'amar doesn't really affect marital status, therefore again, there's room for Ma'amar for the second wife. Because get doesn't remove the zika, therefore ultimately again, there's room for get or something else with second wife as well. So therefore, Allah Lamaisa, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, yesh ma'amar achar ma'amar, yesh get achar get. Good. Rabbi say there's more to see this, and I would urge you, take a look. Actually, the Shulchan Aruch is easy reading. It's you know, if you're looking to relax a little bit today, right, cup of coffee, right, sit back with your Shulchan Aruch, have an Azrasim and Kufalev, and Rabbi say you'll see the halacha. It's actually a very nice explanation. We don't have time to go through all of it today, but at least that's the framework. Let's go weiter. Rabbi say fascinating sugya. Here we go. Asa ma'amar u'ba'al harizuki mitzvasa. So the Mishnah had a very interesting lashon. The Mishnah's lashon was, if you do ma'amar, and then there's bia, ultimately again harizuki mitzvasa. You've performed the mitzvah, right? You've conducted yourself like the mitzvah. And I both say, what's interesting to that is as follows. What can you infer from the Mishnah? From the Mishnah, it sounds like that halacha l'maisa, doing ma'amar before bia, actually sounds like what? Alachatchila. Harizuki mitzvasa. This is the mitzvah. To which the Gemara says, they want to say the Rav Huna. Listen to this. Tam Rav Huna, both say wild. Tam Rav Huna, mitzvas yevama mekadesh ve'achar kach boel. Wow. Both say, so Rav Huna says that halacha l'maisa, even though we've been saying this whole time that Yibum is affected with bia, and there's nothing else to do but bia, Rav Huna says not true. There's a concept of kiddushin. one should go ahead and do Kiddushin ultimately again before he does the Bia of Yibum. Mitzvahs Yivam Mekadesh, the Achar Kach Boel. There should be Kiddushin ultimately again, and afterwards Bia. Ema. Af ze kimitzvasa. Shabbos say, why doesn't the Mishnah say af ze kimitzvasa? Even this is the mitzvah. In other words, Shabbos say, harizu kimitzvasa. The Mishnah says that makes it sound like this is the lechatchila. The lechatchila, you really should give kiddushin, and then there should be bia. So the Gemara says, af ze kimitzvasa pshita. That's obvious. Salai tchamina kevan the ramara osem ma'amar bivimto parcha hemeno zekas yavmin v'chal alav zekas erusin v'nisuin. Eimalav mitzvah ka'avid. I will say this is wild. There is an opinion that says like this, that when you do ma'amar, I will say, ma'amar essentially dissolves the zika. Right? When you do ma'amar, that dissolves the zika, and now what this becomes is a regular marital situation. The problem is that when it becomes a marital situation, I will say, what happens? Ironically enough, it becomes usher to marry this woman, because this is the Yevam's sister-in-law. The only heter to go ahead and marry this woman is when there is a zika. The problem is if the zika is dissolved and this just becomes a regular situation, the marriage is usher. I might have thought that's talacha. Kamash malon, it's not. Kamash malon, Rabbosai, that we hold ma'amar does not dissolve the zika. Ma'amar is just a form of kiddushin. And therefore, halacha lamaisa, if you did ma'amar and then consummated the relationship with bia, halacha lamaisa, that you've acted appropriately. So Shabbos say, here's what we now have. We have two different opinions. We have the Rabbanan telling us that no problem, if you want to do ma'amar before bia, that is not a problem. That's not a problem. Is it required? No, but it's not a problem. Rav Huna coming along and saying, this is how you're supposed to do Yibum. The way Yibum is performed is first there's ma'amar, first there's kiddushin, and then afterwards there's bia. So we're going to analyze this because this is quite fascinating. And to be honest, it's a little bit shocking. Because we've been doing Yevamos for now 3 years. Right? So it's interesting to note this entire time we've been focused on this concept that all Yibum requires is bia. And now we're being introduced to this idea that no, even by Yibum, there's a concept first of kiddushin before bia. So let's analyze this. Gufa, Amrafuna, we'll say, here we go. Mitzvahs Yavmin, the mitzvah of Yibum is Mekadesh va'achar kach boel. Ultimately, first there's kiddushin, and then there's bia. Ve'embal va'asam ma'amar. So this is interesting. But if you had bia first and then ma'amar, kana, it works. In Baal v'asa ma'amar, what does that mean? If there was bia and then ma'amar, so pshita the hakanya b'bia. He will say, you know what you call bia and then ma'amar. You know what you call that? That's called like a yichud room gift. That I'm saying like that's that's an anniversary gift. That's a gift. You gave right after you got married. Okay, you want to go ahead and give your wife. Give your wife a gift, that's fine, but what does that have to do with anything? Ela'ima im ba'al below ma'amar kana. What it means is like this. If you did bia without ma'amar, ultimately it affects marriage. So now, here's what we have. We have Rav Huna telling us that halacha lamaisa, the right way to do yibum is first ma'amar and then bia. Kiddushin and then bia. Essentially, what is Rav Huna saying about? So what is Rav Huna saying? That Yibum needs to be modeled after a regular marital relationship, even though it's not a normal marital relationship. I will say, remember again, Yibum on certain respects, it morphs in to a normal marriage, but there are so many things that are abnormal about it. Most glaringly is, this is a biblically prohibited relationship that is only permitted in this one specific context. Yet halacha l'maaseh Rav Huna feels it should be modeled after a normal marital construct. And therefore, again, just like by normal marriage, you have kiddushin and then nisuin, or erusin and then nisuin. So too by yibum, you should have ma'amar. So remember again, we're going to see what's ma'amar. Ma'amar is kiddushin. You give a woman an item of value, or a shtar. We'll discuss it. You're right, there's kiddushin, there's erusin, and then there's nisuin. Rav Huna seems to be insistent on it. The Tanakama seems to feel you can do it if you want, but if you don't do it, you're fine. To which the Gemara here goes, Vatanya, is that true? Vatanya, loke makos mardus. So we'll say, Vatanya loke. But we learned in the Rabbi Shmuel Silber that if you go ahead and what? If you go ahead and you do Yibom without Ma'amar, you get Malkus. I will say, so by the way, we've just gone from like 0 to 60 in 3 seconds over here. I will say 5 minutes ago, we never even knew that there was a requirement for Ma'amar before Yibum. Right? We never heard of this before, a requirement for Ma'amar for Yibum. Now, Rav Huna is saying there's a requirement, and by the way, if you don't do Ma'amar before Bia, there's Malkus. There's Malkus. Now look at Rashi. Rashi Vatanya Loke, first short line. Ve'in Malkus Arboim Ela al Divrei Torah. Amadoraisihi V'achi Amrit Kana V'Kamish. So we'll say, so again, the fact that there's Malkus sounds like this is a din da'araisa to go ahead and do Ma'amar. Tush the Gemara says, no. This, what kind of Malkus are we talking about? Malkus Mardus Midrabanon. It's rabbinic lashes. It's rabbinic lashes. I will say, so again, meaning it's not the fact that there's a biblical obligation for Ma'amar. Midrabanon, Chazal are telling us you have to do Ma'amar before the Bia. And Chazal felt so strongly about it that if you don't do the Ma'amar, then what? Malchus. There are lashes. Shabbos said, listen to this. Now, where do lashes come in over here? So here we go. The Rav Mangid, Man de Mekadesh Bebia. So we're going to go through a list now. Rav administered lashes for a whole bunch of stuff. Right now, these malchus that we're talking about over here are what we call makas mardus, which are rabbinic lashes when Chazal went ahead and ordered people to be flogged because they felt that people were acting in an inappropriate way. So what are some examples of this? The Rav Mangid Man de Mekadesh Bebia. Rav did not feel that Kiddushin should be effective with Bia. But say, technically speaking, we know Meseches Kiddushin, Ha'isha Niknis, begin with Dvarim, right? Remember again, there are 3 ways to affect Kiddushin. Kesef, Shtar, and Bia, money, document, and relations. Rav felt it is inappropriate to affect Kiddushin, first stage of marriage, with Bia for a variety of reasons. Number one, he felt because it requires specific intent. Not everybody may have the intent. And also he felt it's not the right way for a society to be structured. To the point that Rav went ahead and said that if you did Kiddushin with Bia, although it's halachically permitted, Rav would administer lashes. Uman de Mekadesh Beshuga. Listen to this. Someone who was Mekadesh, a woman, in the marketplace. I will say, the idea was that it looks too flippant, right? Kiddushin requires intent, and Kiddushin requires kavana, and doing things in the marketplace, which again is a transactional place. That's not the place to do Kiddushin. Oman de mekadesh below shiduchi. Listen to this. Or one who did one is mekadesh below shiduchi. I will say, shiduchin are financial arrangements. So a person who enters into a marriage without financial arrangements, that's not the way to enter into a marriage, right? People should know ultimately, again, what the financial setup is. Uman de mevatel gita. So what uman de mevatel gita is, listen to this. This is a man who sends a get with a shaliach. And I both say, technically speaking, let's say, right, Reuven is divorcing Rachel. So Reuven sends a get with a shaliach, with an agent. Until that get reaches Rachel, Reuven has the ability to mevatel the get. Right? How is he mevatel the get? How's he mevatel the get? I hereby am mevatel the get. That's it. What's the problem? The problem is once that get is in the hands of an agent, that requires the agent to not deliver the get. What happens if the agent delivers the get? Let's say the agent doesn't know, the agent doesn't care, I don't know, whatever it is. You can have a catastrophic situation where Rachel receives a get, she thinks she's free and clear, and meanwhile, again, she gets remarried, mamzerus. So Rav used to give malchus to any man who was mevatel a get. It's not the right thing, Rav said. Once you give a get, and you put it in the hand of a shaliach, you should not negate it. Uman de masr moda agita, listen, this is actually interesting, and a person who would go ahead, man de masr moda, ultimately, again, is someone who says that he's giving the get under duress. So I want to say, if a person says, I'm giving the get under duress, Rav would flog him for saying that he's giving it under duress. Which is great, which is absolutely great, right? You think you're under duress? I'll show you under duress, right? So the idea, which again is a Gittin concept, of Kolfen Oso Achi Yomer Rotsa'ani, right? The concept that sometimes you could beat goodwill out of people. Now again, in very specific circumstances, right? Under certain, under a framework of a Beis Din, right? But the idea is that sometimes people want to do the right thing. They just need a little bit of help to come to the realization to do the right thing. So ultimately, we'll say, so therefore Rav said, someone who would make the statement, I'm giving this get under duress, also very dangerous. Because when a person makes a statement like that, they cast aspersions on the get. So Rav was very careful. He did not want Gittin to have any type of cloud of doubt hanging over them. So if a husband would open his mouth about these kind of things, Rav would flog him. Oman de pakir shlicha de rabbanon. And about Rav would also flog someone who was disrespectful to a shliach of Beis Din. That if a shliach of Beis Din would show up, sometimes a person gets a summons to Beis Din, and they're disrespectful to the shliach Beis Din. The shliach Beis Din is just doing his job, right? If you were disrespectful to the shliach Beis Din, Rav would give malchus. Uman dishay shamta d'Rabbanan alei tlasin yomin v'lo asila beidina v'tavala shamte. It's also incredible. If a guy was in shamta means excommunication. If a person allowed himself to remain in a state of excommunication for more than 30 days and didn't come to Beis Din to try to appeal his excommunication, Rav would flog him. I will say, this one is so profound, by the way. What Rav essentially was trying to communicate was, how can you allow your life to remain in a state of disrepair and not do something about it? Right? I will say, all of us fall into disrepair. All of us fall into disrepair at some point in time. Falling into a state of disrepair, that's normal, natural, and human. Sustaining a state of life disrepair is unforgivable and unexcusable. Making mistakes, human. Perpetuating mistakes, that's where there is responsibility. Such a profound yesod. So Rav said, you got yourself excommunicated? Okay, it happens to all of us, right? Get yourself out. The fact that you allow yourself to remain in this state for a prolonged amount of time, Rav says, we give you malchus for that. It's interesting. You're not getting malchus for coming into excommunication. Isn't that fascinating? You're not getting malchus for that. You're getting malchus for allowing yourself to remain in a state of excommunication. I'll say, what a profound Musar Haskell. To land in a bad spot in life, to make mistakes, to make wrong turns, to be in a place I don't want to be, that happens to all of us. And that's forgivable. To allow yourself to stay there, to wallow in it, and to not engage in any course-correcting activity, that's where there's life liability. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara goes, Va'achasna dedar bebei chamoy. Listen to this. And a son-in-law who lived in his in-law's house. Rav would flog a son-in-law who lived in his in-law's house. Now, what are we concerned about over here? So Rashi points out over here that Allah Chalamaysa were concerned about immorality between the son-in-law and the mother-in-law. So the Gemara says, the doyer in the chaliflo, it's only if he lives there, but not if he visits there. To which the Gemara says, there was a son-in-law who visited his in-laws, right? And Rav Sheshes flogged him. That was a different case. Hahu made them havadai mechamse. There were rumors about this particular man and his mother-in-law. So because there were rumors about him, ultimately, again, that's why he was flogged. Okay, let's say, so the idea of the Gemara said, the Naradoim said, Bekulolo man gidrav, so we'll say, interesting, the Naradoim had a different version. They felt, we'll say, by the way, this is a pretty long flogging list, right? So the Naradoim said, Rav did not really flog for all of these things. The only real two things that he flogged for was one who does kiddushin through bia, and ultimately, again, one who does kiddushin without shidduchin, without proper financial arrangements. Vika da Amri, others say, afilu b'shidduchin nami mishum pritzusa. I will say, just to point out that Allah Chalamaysa, even if a person had shidduchin, right, which means they made financial arrangements before they went ahead and did kiddushin, halacha l'maisa, Rav still did not like kiddushin with bia. In other words, Rav was against kiddushin with bia, even if you had shidduchin beforehand. Rav just did not, because kiddushin with bia, Rabbosai, requires specific intent. Rav did not feel that it was the appropriate course of action. Good. So I will say, so again, I just want to point out, why did we just do this entire sugya? I will say, because interestingly enough, Rav Huna's position, remember, what's Rav Huna? Let's go back. What's Rav Huna's position? Rav Huna's position was that halacha l'maisa, you require maimer before you do yibum, right? You have to have maimer before you do yibum. what is that predicated on? So we'll say it seems to be that ultimately, where's Rav Huna coming from? He's coming from Shitas Rav. Rav had this insistence that we don't want relationships concretized with Bia. Or I should say, let me say it differently. We don't want relationships initiated with Bia, not concretized. They are concretized with Bia. We don't want them initiated with Bia. Right? Varaya, Rav would give you lashes if you affected Kiddushin with Bia. It works, by the way. Rav would give lashes. So Rav Huna says, based on this, whenever there's a marital relationship, we don't want it to be started with Bia. So instead, what are we going to start with? Kiddushin. Kiddushin. Even by Yibum, there's going to be an obligation of Mamar first, and then ultimately again solidified with the Bia. To which the Gemara says, Saketz and Mamar. So, okay, so now that we know, at least according to Rav Huna, that you require Mamar, so what does Mamar look like? Right? What does that process look like? So here we go. So Nasan la Kesef, Oshava Kesef. Very simple. Well, it's just like Kiddushin. How do you affect Kiddushin? You give a woman money or an item of value, right? Oshava Kesef. So again, you have to give her money, actual money, or an item of value. So we'll say, so remember again, just today, it's like contemporarily, how do we do Kiddushin? So today we do Kiddushin with a ring. With a ring, under the chuppah, Chassan gives the kala a ring. Again, I don't mean like an engagement. An engagement ring doesn't affect anything halachically, right? But again, the wedding band that a chassan gives a kala underneath the chuppah, that's kiddushin. That's kesef kiddushin. You could just as easily give her $1, right? It's the same thing, right? Halacha l'maisa. So therefore, the Gemara says, go ahead and give her money or shava kesef or something, an item worth money, ubishtar ketzad, right? Or a star. Or a document, Keitzad Bishtar. So the Gemara said, Keitzad Kidamra. What do you mean, how? Like we said before, Kasav al Niyar, Al Acheres, Ava Bishem, Boshava Pruta, Hari At Mikudeshasli. We'll say, how are you Mekadesh with a star? It's very simple. You take a piece of paper or an earthenware shard, even if the item itself is worthless, and you write on it, Hari At Mikudeshasli. You are betrothed, you are Mikudeshes to me. That's it. That's Kiddushin Bishtar. Amar Abaye says, no. This is what I mean to say. Haki Kamar, Shtar Ksuvas Yav Min Keitzad. I will say, there's another piece over here. So I will say, there's so much happening over, which is so incredibly exciting. So here's what we have. I will say, first of all, it seems to be, you see from like the feeling of the Gemara, that the Gemara is adopting the position of Rav Huna, right? And we're going to see halacha l'maisa what we do, but halacha l'maisa, well, I should say halacha l'maisa. The Gemara seems to be saying that we're going to take Rav Huna's position, that there's going to be ma'amar before bia, okay? And then how do you affect ma'amar? Just like regular kiddushin. Either give her money, give her an item worth value, or shtar. So the Gemara says, how do you do shtar? How do you do shtar? The same way you do kiddushin shtar. Hariat mikudeshes li. And put it on a piece of paper, a pottery shard, whatever it is. The Gemara says, no, that's not what I mean. What does the shtar ksuva look like in a yibum scenario? So now we already discussed this, right? What does a ksuva, what's the text of a ksuva in a yibum marriage? Watch this. So kasavla, here's what your Rebbe says, fascinating. Kasavla, ana ploni bar ploni. I so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. So again, Reuven died, Shimon, his brother, is doing Yibum with the wife Rachel. Let's say their father was Yaakov. So it would say, I, Shimon, the son of Yaakov, Kabilas Yas Plonis Yevimti, have accepted Rachel my Yevama. So Kabilas Plonis Yevimti alai lazun ulefarnasa karai. I have accepted upon myself the obligation to support her, to feed her, and to support her in the appropriate way. Obilvad shetehei ksuvasa al nichse baila harishon. This is the text of the ksuva, right? But in the ksuva it says, but her claim for a ksuva is not on me. Her claim of a ksuva is on her first husband, my brother Ruvain. However, ve'ilas lamirishon takin le rabbanim misherin. So we'll say, so remember we've seen this before. So we'll say, that's the text. That isn't the first thing. That's the text of a yibum ksuva. So Yavam acknowledges, Shimon acknowledges, I have the obligation to support this woman. In other words, we'll say, remember again, to be clear, once Shimon marries her, halacha l'maisa, he has to support her, but the ksuva itself, the value of the ksuva is against, again, Ruvain's estate. What happens if Reuven has no money? Reuven died without money. So we'll say we've seen this already before. Halach l'maisa, if Reuven does not have money, then what? Shimon is obligated to provide Rachel with a proper ksuva, because you must remember again, the ksuva serves a twofold purpose. Number one, it gives a woman financial security in the event of death or divorce. What it also does is it's a mechanism to ensure that a husband does just not, doesn't just like summarily divorce his wife, flippantly divorce his wife because there's a big financial payout. He has to think twice about divorcing her, which also affords her some level of marital security. So Chazal, we're not going to let a woman be without a ksuva. So as much as halach l'maisa in an ideal situation, the ksuva is against the first husband's estate. In the event that he died penniless, the ksuva comes from Shimon. Incredible. So again, we'll see what we do with halach l'maisa. Abai mirabba. Nasan laget. I will say, so I'll just point out, just very quickly, the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Yibum V'Chalitza, Perek Beis Halacha Aleph. And I will say this is echoed in the Shulchan Aruch. Listen to this. Me divrei sofrim shelo yavo hayavam al yivimto ad she'ekadesh osa bifnei shnei edim bepruta o b'shaver pruta v'zeu nikra mamar. I will say this is how he paskin. Halacha l'maisa like Rav Huna. It's incredible. Like Rav Huna, we'll say, all seriousness, isn't this a fasting? We're on daf, what daf we are now? Nun Beis, right? And I will say, it's the first we're hearing of this, and yet this is how the Rambam Shulchan Aruch paskins, that really, you don't immediately affect Yibam with Bia. There's Kiddushin. We call that Kiddushin Maimar, and how is that done? It's done in front of two witnesses, and it's done with a pruta or a shaver pruta, money or an item worth money, or with a shtar. Ultimately, again, then he goes on. He says, "Kashem shumakadesh asivinto kachu mevarich birchas nisuin ba'asara v'kosev ksuva kedin kol nosei isha." Shabbos said, "Listen to this. Not only that, when you get married, what do you have? Sheva brachas. You should have a chuppah with ultimately 10 people. Nisuin ba'asara. Write her a ksuva." Now, again, the Rambam does say, what happens to both sides if you skipped all of this and the Yavam just did bia? What happens if you just skipped everything, skipped mamar, skipped everything? What's the halacha? It works, but listen to this: umakin osam makas mardos. I will say so again. Halacha l'maisa, right? You get lashes. Any time you violate the D'Rabbanan, you get lashes. So we'll say halacha l'maisa. So again, just to be clear, we'll see this more about halacha l'maisa. We accept the framework of Rav Huna. But of course, if you dispensed with mamar and just went right to the biyah, it works, right? Yibum is accomplished by makas mar. That's incredible. So let's go back there. Nosan laget va'amar hare at migureshes himeni vi'at mutaris t'chol adam mahu. So I was saying, okay, so let's, if we just finished with Kiddushin, now let's go to get. Listen to this case. So the Gemara says, let's say the Yavam gave to his Yevama a get. And he gives her the get and he says to her, you are migureshes from me, but you are not mutter to any other man. Now I will say, just Gittin 101, right? Gittin 101, right? The essence of a get is that it permits a woman to marry other men. So technically speaking, now you can give a get with a Tanai, right? There's no problem with giving a Tanai. So a man can give a get to a woman that says, this is your get on the condition that you never again eat chocolate ice cream. You could give a get like that, right? Or give me $1 million. Unfortunately, you can give a get with a Tanai, but Lamaisa, what you can't do is, you can't give a get that prevents her from marrying anyone else. Because that's the essence of a get. The get is it releases her from her husband and permits her to anyone else. So any sheer, anything you withhold in her ability to marry. So both say, so the Gemara is saying like this get would not work. The question is, in a Yibum scenario, Mahu. What happens over here? So we'll say, let's finish the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows: Mahu. Rashi says, Leposla al echav va'alav. So we'll say, just to illustrate what we're talking about over here. Reuven dies, leaves behind the widow Rachel. Right? So now there's Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Shimon gives Rachel a get. They both say, normally, when you give a get, what happens? Right? When one of the brothers gives a get, what happens? Right? We're done. It closes the window on Yibam, nothing more to talk about. In this case, he gave her a get. But I both say, what kind of get did he give her? The type of get that would never work on its own. right? In other words, this is a fundamentally flawed get. In other words, when we were speaking about a get up until now, he gave her a get. Okay, you give your Yevama a get, it precludes Yibum, it shuts everything down, you still require Chalitza. What the Gemara is essentially asking is like this: what if you were to give her a get that is an invalid get? In other words, that this type of get would never work in the world of Gittin. This is your get, but you're not permitted to marry anyone else. That's not a get. It's not a get. The shaila is, does this type of get effectively close the window of Yibum for all of the brothers or not? That's the shaila. So the Gemara says, Mau, get Yevama d'Rabbanan hu, get the Mahani be'eshes, ish Mahani be'Yevama, get lo Mahani be'eshes, ish lo Mahani be'Yevama. So do we say in general, the fact that a get closes the window on Yibum, that's midrabanan. But the only type of get that Chazal said works to close the Yibum window is what kind of get? A get that would normally be a valid get. But a get that's an invalid get is irrelevant and therefore does not close the Yibum window. O Dilma, asilach lufe begita. Or perhaps there's a concern like this, that a get is a get is a get in this type of situation. And the Maisa, because this is not even a real get to begin with, anything that has like a semblance of a get, essentially, quote unquote, works to close the window of Yibum and to prevent any of the brothers from doing Yibum. Amarle, chayshin dumi asilach lufe begita. So he answered me and said, you're right. You know what? In this type of situation, even though this is an invalid get, halacha l'may said this type of get would be enough to close the Yibum window, because again, we're concerned that if this get is invalid, people often don't know how to draw distinctions between this get and that get. So if we permit Yibum after this type of get, which is an invalid get, people may come to permit Yibum even when in the aftermath of a valid get. First, why but if that's the case, Rabbi will say, what happens if the Yavam, right, Shimon, gives Rachel a blank piece of paper, and he says to her, this is your get. This is your get. Does that also close the window of Yibum? After Rabbi will say, after halacha l'maisa, aren't you concerned? He's calling it a get, so do you have to be concerned ultimately, again, for getting confused with other things? I'm going to say, no. Hasam lo pasal b'kuhuna, hacha ka pasal b'kuhuna. I will say, here's the big difference. When a man gives his wife a blank piece of paper, Abosai, and he says, this is your get, does that do anything? Nothing. It's not a get. There's nothing to talk about. Interestingly enough, Abosai, in a case where halacha l'maisa, a man gives a get to his wife. Let's say, a man is a Kohen, and he gives a get to his wife. Ultimately, again, and he's a Kohen, he gives a get to his wife, and the type of get that he gives her is a get that says, this is your get, but you're not permitted to any other man. Say, without getting into everything, that creates what's called a reach haget. That is not a valid get. But when it comes to kahuna, we're hypersensitive with these things, and anything that has the name of a get attached to it will preclude a woman from marrying into the kahuna, even if the get is an invalid get. So Rabbi said this, that's called reach haget. The pasuk says that ultimately, again, a Kohen cannot marry an isha gerusha meisha, a woman who is divorced from her husband. Afilu lo nisgarsha ela meisha, even if she's only divorced from her own husband and not permitted to other men, still a Kohen can't go ahead and marry her. I will say, what's a case where a woman is divorced from her own husband and not permitted to other men? So I'll say that would be this case where a husband gives his wife a get, and the get says, this is your get, but you're not permitted to marry anyone else. Now I will say, the get doesn't work. But for kahuna, it would preclude her from marrying a Kohen, and this is called Vahainu Reach Haget Sheposel Bikahuna. This is, Rabbi said, it's called scent of a get. Something has a scent of a get. It's not a get, but the kahuna is especially sensitive to anything related to divorce. See, even if you have an invalid divorce, but it looks like a get, that could potentially preclude a woman from marrying a Kohen. So I will say, the Gemara doesn't resolve this question. In other words, we're asking over here, by a Yibum scenario, a man gives his wife what would otherwise, the Yavam gives the Yevama what under normal circumstances would be a totally invalid get. does that go ahead and close the window on Yibum or not? Or is that simply rendered totally and fundamentally irrelevant? So the Gemara doesn't answer it yet. We'll go weiter. So the Gemara, Hari Amru, we said, Amr Echad Lavlar, Kasav Get Larosasi, Lichisha Echna Sena, Agashena, Harezeget, Mishabiad Lagarsha. But it's an interesting case. A man does erisin. A man does erisin. So say, let's say this case. Ruvain is Mekadesh Rachel. Okay, simple case. Ruvain is Mekadesh Rachel. Now we'll say they've done erisin, first stage of marriage. He goes over to the sofer, says, do me a favor, sofer, write a get for me, because once I marry her, I'm going to divorce her. Right? I don't know, he wants the tax write-off. I don't know, whatever it is. You know, the Maisa, right? Once I do, right? So we'll say, that works. That works. Why does it work? Because since from the stage of erisin, he has the ability to go ahead and divorce her, you have the ability to commission a get from the moment that divorce is a possibility. However, listen to this. If a man, for example, let's say a man is dating a woman and things are getting serious, but he wants to go ahead and hedge his bets. So he wants to have the sofer write a get now that I could use in the event that things don't go well. Such a get like that is invalid. Why? Because ultimately, while they're dating, he doesn't have the ability to go ahead and write a get that will be chal for their marriage. In other words, a get can only be commissioned at a time that a husband has the power of divorce. So from erisin and on. But before erisin, any get written is simply invalid. Listen to this interesting case. What about for one's Yevama? What's the halacha? We'll say this is fast. Look at Rashi. Second line from the top. Levimto mahu. Kasvu kodem shekinsa ukishekinsa nasnula ma'ushetis garsha. We'll listen to this. What happens? Listen to this fascinating situation. Right? Reuven dies. One same case. Reuven dies, leaves behind Rachel. Shimon is ready to do Yibum. But before he does Yibum, what does he say? I want to write a get. So remember again, they haven't done Yibum yet. So there's a Zika. They haven't done Yibum. He commissions the get before Yibum occurs to use it after Yibum and they're married. If things don't go well, the get is already there. So now, we'll say, remember, we'll say, here what's fascinating about this? We just had two cases. Case number one was a man during erisin. Could a man during erisin write a get for his wife? Yes. And use it later? Yes. Why? Because since they already have erisin, he has the power of divorce. Therefore, he could write it. If they're dating, can he go ahead and commission a get? No. Why? Since there's no power of divorce, he can't write a get. So here's the interesting shayla. Now again, Reuven died. Shimon is going to do Yibum. Hasn't done Yibum yet with Rachel. Before he does Yibum, he wants to write a get now. Does that work? But when I say write a get now for what? Why is he writing the get now? To be used when? At some future date, right? After Yibum, potentially some future date. So does that work? So do we say, since there's a Zika, ultimately, again, she's like his Arusa, and therefore should be permitted to write the get. Oh, Dilma, Kevan the lo avad b'ma'amar lo. Or perhaps, again, no. We'll say that now that we established Amar Aleph, that what? That you need ma'amar. We'll say, isn't this fascinating? Now that we established that really, at least midrabanan, you need ma'amar before bia. So therefore, I both say, essentially, before ma'amar, it's like they're dating, right? In other words, there's no marital bond that's there. And maybe a get written before ma'amar should not be effective. Teku. All right, I both say the Gemara tables that question. And the Yana will have to answer it. Next. By Rav Chananya. Kasav get leze kasav lo ma'amaro. Le ma'amaro v'lo leze kasav ma'o. What's the interesting case? What happens if someone wrote a get? This is fascinating. Someone wrote a get, ultimately, again, to terminate the Zika, but not to terminate the Ma'amar. Or to terminate the Ma'amar, but not to terminate the Zika. Rashi says, V'asa ba Ma'amar tchila, ma'u sheti pasal alav bekach. So I will say, so assuming that he went ahead and he did Ma'amar, so he wrote a get for the Zika, but not for the Ma'amar. Or a get for the Ma'amar, not for the Ma'u. So the Gemara says, V'lo the Zika. So Ma'u, Ma'amar ilove zika karami. Do we say that Ma'amar sits on top of the zika? In other words, that first there's zika, and then Ma'amar builds on top of the zika. V'habile kimegarish chatzi isha, and it's ki'ilu like you're divorcing half a woman. V'megarish chatzi isha la'asav l'klum, and divorcing half a woman obviously is an irrelevant act. O dilma, hay luchudei v'hay luchudei. Hay luchudei koi v'hay luchudei koi. Or maybe again I will say, ma'amar and zika kind of operate independently. So, and therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, a get for one of them would work. The tifshal emi de Rava, the Amar Rava, nasan get l'ma'amaro, hutshrat sarasa. Rava said that ultimately, if you give a get for the ma'amar done with one of the wives, so the get for the ma'amar ultimately permits the tzara. To which the Gemara said, which seems like Rava say that a get, even just given for ma'amar, works. To which the Gemara says, "L'Rava pshita le l'Rav Chinina mi baile." So, what's the halacha? To which we'll say the Gemara once again says teku. So we'll say we're left with two tekus. Teku number one is what happens if you write a get before ma'amar. Right, you write a get before ma'amar. Does the yavam have the power to write a get before ma'amar, which is essentially saying is the period before ma'amar like erusin or like pre-erusin? That's question one. The Gemara leaves it as a teku. And question number two, if you write, interestingly enough, a targeted get. A targeted get meaning you're looking to dissolve one part of this relationship. You're looking to dissolve the zika. You're looking to dissolve, ultimately, again, the ma'amar. Does a targeted get like that work to remove the one element you're targeting? Teku. Incredible. Let's go back to chalatz va'asa ma'amar. Amrav Huna, so Amrav Yehuda, Amarav, Zudiv Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say these. So remember again, the Mishnah said that if a person went ahead and did chalitza, and then did ma'amar, ultimately, again, that ma'amar that you do with the second wife is halachically irrelevant. Halachically irrelevant. To which the Gemara says, whose opinion is that? So did Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva, because what does Rabbi Akiva hold? Damar in kiddushin tov sin b'chai ve'lavin. Incredible, I will say. Rabbi Akiva will say, remember, this is the sheet of Rabbi Akiva we saw in the Mishnah B'Mam Zerus. Rabbi Akiva holds, you will say, it goes both ways. Rabbi Akiva holds that you could create a mamzer even through Chayvei Lavin. Rabbi say this is the dramatic sheet of Rabbi Akiva. You marry, right? You have relations with someone who is prohibited to you by a lav, ultimately creates mamzerus. Rabbi say, in any situation we're going to create mamzerus, kiddushin is not tofsin. Marriage doesn't take effect. So Rabbi Akiva will say, once you do chalitza with Rachel, if you then try to do ma'amar with Leah, it doesn't work. Why? Because once you do chalitza, there's a lav to marry your chalutza. Therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, if you do chalitza with Rachel and try to do ma'amar with Leah, the ma'amar is irrelevant. It won't work. It won't work. Ultimately, because kiddushin is not tofsin, kiddushin doesn't take effect with chayvei lavin. Aval chachamim omrim yesh achar chalitza klum. The chachamim both say it works. They both say, what do we say when we mean it works? When we say it works, it's usher, but it works. And they both say, if you do chalitza, a man does chalitza with a woman and marries her, legal or illegal? Oh, come on. Illegal, right? Illegal, right? Of course it's illegal. Of course it's illegal. Does it work if you marry her? Right? If you give her a ring, you do a minyan, sheva brachas, chuppah. Are you married? Yes, except according to Rabbi Akiva. So again, when we say according to Chacham that it works, it means it's illegal. It's illegal, but it works. The Gemara says, "V'cham yesh achar chalitza klum." In other words, you can go ahead and technically effect marriage after chalitza. It's illegal, albeit it works. Umi matzis mokus like Rabbi Akiva. So are you going in and setting up this case like Rabbi Akiva? V'hakatani reisha. We said in the beginning of the Mishnah, nasan get v'asa ma'amar. If the yavam gave a get and then did ma'amar, so what's the halacha? Tzricha get v'chalitza. Ultimately, again, he requires get, right? And chalitza. Rabbi Akiva, it's Rabbi Akiva. Kevan diyav la get mi mahani ma'amar. According to Rabbi Akiva, once you give a get, ma'amar should be impossible. Why? Vatanya, Rabbi Akiva omer minayin lenosin get liivim to shenas alav liiv olamis. Because Rabbi Akiva holds, once you give a get to your yevama, ultimately, we'll say a get, which is the Rabban according to Rabbi Akiva, she's aser forever. She's aser forever. Shenemar lo yuchal baila harishon asher shalcha achar shiluach. Ultimately, and Rabbi Akiva says halacha lemaisa. Look at Rashi. Achar shiluach kilor midichsiv asher shalcha kra yisera delotzar chachi kamar yesh lacha mishleach laasha asher lahachzir achar shiluach afilu lo nises. There's Yevamos. We'll say Rabbi Akiva darshans based on the phrase asher shalcha. Achar shiluach. Once you do something to send her away, by definition, she is prohibited to you. So according to Rabbi Akiva, in a Yibum context, once get is given, there's nothing more to talk about. Rashi, get Yavmin midrabanon. Ultimately, again, Rashi will say, no. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, the concept of a get by Yibum is only a drabanon, ukra asmachta ba'alma. And ultimately, again, the pasuk that we just quoted is only an asmachta, to which the Gemara that supports Amarebi in advar malalu amurim el div Rabbi Akiva she'ose chalutza ke'erva. Because everything we've said before is only according to Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva ultimately treated a chalutza like a bona fide erva, and therefore again halacha lemaisa to the point that it would be an isser mamzerus if you were to marry her. The Gemara says avachachamim omrim yesh achar chalitza klum. All right, boss, we'll stop over. We'll pick up with this Tanya Mihachi tomorrow. So again, we're just leaving off in the middle over here, trying to figure out halacha lemaisa. What happens after a get is given? We've solidified a lot of the halachic framework today for Ma'amar, for Gittin, and Emir Hashem will continue with the sheet of Rabbi Akiva in tomorrow's daf. Shkoyach. All right, we'll stay on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone.